Let me ask a few questions. I'll come back. I want to speak a little bit more, but I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. And before we move on, I want to follow up on that. Colonel, look, I share some of the same sentiments that Representative Bacala expressed in it, and I had a couple of questions. So one of the questions is, you talked about the culture of the state, and as you go, every hour the culture changes. And so I really want to just know about the culture of state police, though, for a minute. You know, you're putting these policies in, but do you have enough time, one, and two, what assurances can you give us that if you're not around in the next 18 months when the administration changes, that these policies are going to withstand the test of time, one? And then sort of as a follow-up to that, if they can't, what assurances can you give us that the culture of state police won't revert to what it was at the time of the death of Ronald Greene?
Well, as policies, and to be honest with you, a policy can be changed by a superintendent whenever a superintendent feels the need to change a policy. But when you're talking about changing culture, when you're talking about building compassion, building empathy, and things of that nature, there's multiple ways by which you do it, not just by policy. You do it by that's also going to carry that vision forward. And that's exactly what we're doing. I'm promoting people that share my vision. That's how you change the culture and continue to change. But you also start at the beginning. You start with the troopers that you're bringing on to your agency. You move on to your mid-level managers, and you complete that with senior level. And when they do that vision, then of course you try to change their behavior as it is different. But when you're changing culture, that's why I'm visiting my troopers. That's why I'm putting people in place that share my vision. That's why I'm implementing policies. That's why I'm sending our troopers out to training more than they have been in the last several years, so that they can get some different perspective about 21st century policing. And as they bring that information back, I challenge them to help us. This is not a I change an agency. This is a we change an agency. But also community to get their perspective, their viewpoints, and we bring that into our agency. That's how we change culture. And that's how we'll continue to change that culture. That culture will continue to change because I have people, regardless of whether I'm here or not, that will also continue to implement that change. And that's what's important. I'm not just looking at today. I'm looking at tomorrow. I'm looking at succession. I'm looking at the future of our agency, but also our communities. Because I also live in our communities. I drive in our communities. I work in our communities. So does my son. So does my wife. And I want to make sure that we have the right people out there that's serving our communities, not just policing our communities.
All right. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Colonel, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, but let me first associate myself with the comments of Representative Bacala. Totally agree with the things that he said. Colonel, let me first begin. You know, you've urged us to continue to support the women and men who serve this great state as troopers. And I couldn't agree with you more, but let me just reiterate that, you know, none of us on this committee want to be here. We're here because Mr. Greene was treated not as a human being. He was not treated with dignity. He was not treated with respect. And so you mentioned accountability being important to you, and I'm encouraged to hear that. It's important to us too, and it's important to our speaker, and that's why this committee was formed. To date, Ms. Molnar has not been brought any closure. And while there may be accountability moving forward, I will speak for myself and say there has not been much accountability to those that allowed this incident to happen from state police. And thus far, there's certainly been no accountability from our criminal justice system. I know that process is still taking its course. But in my opinion, there's been very little accountability, and it's devastating that Ms. Molnar still can't bring closure to the situation. With that said, I've said publicly in the past, and I will reiterate it today, this heinous incident should not foreshadow the overwhelming number of women and men in state police who do their jobs admirably with commitment and dedication every single day. And I am thankful for the women and men. I have had the opportunity to interact with many of them who are just as disgusted and devastated at this incident as we are. And I don't think you'll find a more supportive group of people as you do in this room for our hardworking women and men in law enforcement. And I just want to reiterate to you and to all of the public, in my district, which is overwhelmingly African American, I do reiterate to them that the overwhelming majority of women and men in state police are good, honorable, decent people. And I'll say that today, and I thank them for their service. Transparency, Colonel, I'm glad to hear your commitment to transparency. I will just say, we have to be consistent, though, when we talk about transparency. We can't be selective. Sure. And then the last thing, I just wanted to, touch on the implicit bias training for a minute. So important. For those of us that have studied human behavior and bias, the truth is we all approach life with a bias. Sure. It's just real. As policymakers, we have a bias. In any profession, folks look through the lens with some sense of bias. Bias training now required for every state trooper, and is it a one and done type thing, or is it ongoing? Can you comment what state police is doing with respect to?
Yes, sir, it is required, and I, from the top down, inclusive of myself, have gone through implicit bias training. We will continue to keep that a part of our program because we think it's quite frankly, it's needed and it's beneficial to everybody in our agency. So yes, sir, every trooper has gone through implicit bias training, inclusive of myself, and we will continue to train our personnel in implicit bias training as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Colonel. I might have more questions later, but appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
Thank you, Representative Hughes. Representative Villio.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Colonel Davis, for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to thank my colleague, Representative Hughes, for his comments, as well as Representative Bacala and Representative Jordan. And I think we all do come united in this particular matter. When Representative Bacala talked about the lack of communication between IA and the criminal investigation, that's a fact that there was a lack of communication. But the real fact, as I understand the testimony to this committee throughout the year, is that that communication was blocked, and it was intentionally blocked. As I appreciate the testimony to this committee by Lane Barnum, and I apologize, I would normally use rank. Is it Colonel Barnum?
Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel.
As I appreciate the testimony of Lieutenant Colonel Barnum, he says he made that decision. I suspect someone made that decision for him, but the bottom line is the investigation was blocked between the two. Now, I appreciate the Garrity warning as much as anyone, but the Garrity warning has to do with statements. It doesn't have to do with the findings of the investigation. And had that investigation and the separation from the two not been blocked, maybe the video, Lieutenant Clary's video, would have been found and given to the DA. Maybe Lieutenant Clary's video would have been found earlier and given to the United States Attorney's Office. We'll never know that, but it's a direct result of the blocking of the two. So my question to you is, have you determined that that was a system failure within Louisiana State Police? And if so, since the formation of this committee, what, if anything, have you done to prevent that from happening again?
Thank you, ma'am. And while I can't speak to what Lieutenant Colonel Barnum stated because I wasn't in charge at that time, I can tell you that Based upon my assessment, yes, that's a system failure, because quite frankly, that's a decision that I should be making, or someone at my level should be making, with regards to that type of investigation. As such, since that time, Internal Affairs reports directly to me. Force Investigations reports directly to me. They communicate without, of course, violating any of the Garrity rules. And allowing that and having that communication allows them to perform their jobs as they should. But I've also set in policies to ensure that when a criminal investigation that's initiated by us gets to a certain point, then that allows our administrative investigations to move forward. And again, there's no block. With regards to body-worn camera, we've set in policies and processes to ensure that all body-worn camera and in-car camera systems and any other camera systems that's been introduced to a case is put into our system. And from there, certain people have access to that system. Now, when we have people that do not upload or miscategorize, then we hold them accountable. We discipline them. And that's to discourage them from miscategorizing, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. It helps them do their job, which helps our internal affairs personnel do their jobs. But with the not only creation of our technology and business support section, we now have subject matter experts that understand and have the expertise to go by and look for certain patterns, look for certain cameras. So I've put in redundancy. And by having that redundancy in place, that is what helps us to identify fail points where someone, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, miscategorized or didn't upload their camera footage. And it's those processes that's going to help us ensure that we're going to have accountability.
Because you agree with me, it's a matter of simply counting. If everyone is equipped with a body-worn camera, as I understand it, and or a dash cam camera, it's a matter of knowing who was on the scene.
Yes,
and then counting to make sure we have all of those videos, correct?
That's correct. And when you look at some of the fail points, for instance, when the policy states that everyone that's involved in the use of force should fill out a form, and not everybody's filling out a form, well, that may lead other investigators who's investigating that case to not have all of the requisite information to know where to go and get some of that footage. So we have changed that information. We've changed those policies. We've changed those procedures to ensure that people are filling out the forms. They're completing their documents. They're uploading their cameras, footages wherever and whenever by policy. And then we also have redundancy and having people that go behind and check and audit to ensure that we have all of that information.
So the policies have been officially updated and or revised and distributed throughout the organization. Is that my understanding?
Yes, ma'am. But I can also tell you that as we continue, I have expanded my policy section, and we're now reviewing policies from other agencies who have gone through and who have operated on best practices. So I can assure you that we'll probably continue to change those policies as we get newer, better policies introduced.
Sure. And I appreciate that testimony. What about, you talked about potential mischaracterization of videos, and you talked about having experts involved in all of this. Is there any effort to create a unified way of labeling videos, for instance, whether it would be based on an item number or whether it would be based upon a location of the incident, etc., something that the same fields are being entered into by all officers on the scene in the same way, so that when you search for information in our videos, it's readily obtainable. Have we addressed that?
Yes, ma'am, and we have a systematic way of categorizing that, but it still takes the officer to categorize the video. Otherwise, it would just upload. When the officer charged their device, it would just automatically upload and may not have the same categorization. So we have people, when that's not performed in that manner, and whether it be officers incapacitated or what have you, if we know that that officer was on scene, but yet we can establish a timeline, then we can still have our auditors go and search for all audio or all footage to ensure that they're looking at all of it during that time frame. So it's not just about having that standardized categorization, because that is being done. We have a standardized way to categorize a video, but it still requires the officer or the trooper to categorize that video.
And as I appreciate your testimony, if an officer does so incorrectly, you have policies in place so that there can be an internal investigation into that. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It may be an internal investigation depending on circumstances, or we may refer that to be a non-IA type case,
Sure.
but it definitely will be reviewed.
And can you tell us, is Lieutenant Clary still an employee of the state police?
Yes, ma'am.
Is he the only one who was on the scene that remains in the employ? Or are there others?
He and I believe Corey York, but I need to verify that.
And what position does Lieutenant Clary hold in the state police?
He's still a lieutenant.
And Lieutenant, is there any particular division that he oversees?
He's in patrol.
Patrol.
Yes, ma'am.
And is he one of the individuals that has received any type of promotion since you've become colonel?
No, ma'am.
What specific policies, one of the troubling issues that has also come to light is the system failure with regard to the wiping clean of cell phones. Certainly throughout the Las Vegas scandal, it was my understanding under Colonel Edmonston that was a policy that was to be corrected. And yet we faced again in Ronald Greene the destruction of what I consider to be evidence in this case, or arguably it certainly has left many to believe that there was the destruction of evidence. Can you state, since this oversight committee was put in place, what specific policies you've put in place to address that issue?
Well, with regards to how we sanitize phones and things of that nature, we have put a policy, upgraded our policy. I will get you that policy to show you, but I don't have it right here.
Thank you. And Colonel Davis, I know Representative Hughes discussed implicit bias training, and there's no question that implicit bias training is important, as is racial discrimination, as is racial profiling. But in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, what happened to Ronald Greene on this night was not a matter of implicit bias as much as it was a matter of unlawful use of force. And so with regard to excessive force and use of force training, I know that you mentioned that there is some changes in the training. Have those changes been implemented, or is that something that y'all are looking to do?
So I have created a 15-person force investigative unit in which all of them have been trained and now are certified in conducting use of force, officer-involved shooting type investigations. They have received great training from across the nation, from FLETC to some of the other better programs, and they are in place and they are now moving towards conducting those
And I
types.
don't mean to interrupt you, but is that the top to bottom? I had a note to ask you who was doing, you mentioned the top to bottom assessment in your statement. Is that the team that's doing the top to bottom assessment, or is that someone else?
No, ma'am. Those are troopers that are actually conducting those investigations. My top to bottom organization is called the Bowman Group.
The
Bowman.
BOLLMA.
BOWMAN group. That's the group that I have contracted with to do a top to bottom assessment.
Have they begun their assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
Have they given any timelines on what they intend to do? I guess, do we have a contract in place that lays out the scope and the timeline for their service?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that's available to this committee?
Yes, ma'am. I'll provide that to you after we leave here.
Thank you, Colonel Davis. I think that, well, let me just ask you, any other policy changes, personnel changes, if you could just state for this committee in terms of, and it's certainly going to be important when we go to prepare a report of our recommendations, or any specific policies, personnel changes, training, etc., outside of what we've talked about specifically today, have you implemented as a result of this committee's oversight?
Well, ma'am, really, as I mentioned before, I really started looking at making changes beforehand. But while going through the committee, as well as while speaking with the Bowman Group with regards to our assessment, we have made some changes. We've enhanced our body-worn camera, in-car camera policy, which now expands the types of incidents that shall be recorded. Provide clarity to the number of video reviewers by supervisors, clarify that actions that will be taken when misconduct is observed, and ensure that officers shall have their cameras on and ready to record at all times as dictated by policy. We mandated, obviously, implicit bias training. We're also, with regards to the body-worn camera, all lieutenants and below now, when they're in uniform, will have body-worn cameras on. And that's a change that we've made as a result as well. I think that's beneficial as well to make sure we've got more coverage. And as we've seen in really recent weeks, oftentimes without that body camera footage, you're missing valuable viewpoints of what occurred. We've looked at making changes and implementing de-escalation training and duty to intervene training at all LSP and DPS commission officers, in addition to our base curriculum. We're evaluating the implementation of a discipline matrix, and I think that's going to be huge as well, so that we can create consistency throughout discipline. I think people will be more adept to understanding and making changes to their behavior. All, as I mentioned before, and all additional to all patrol personnel, criminal investigations division personnel at the rank of lieutenant and below have been issued body-worn cameras. When working uniform capacity, they will comply with the LSP body-worn camera policy. Our technology and business support section is adding an in-car camera and body-worn camera, check the box, so that, again, we can have that redundancy in people, making sure that we know what the supervisors know what to look for, as well as our auditors. Some of the other changes is creating a standardized early identification system for consistent tracking. So our early identification system is a system whereby when officers actually, whether they get involved in pursuit, uses of forces, complaints, and so forth, that information is communicated back to us. Well, creating a system and a consistent system helps our supervisors identify troopers that may be at risk for performing some of these or having some of these behaviors that we have experienced in the past. By identifying that early, we can capture that before we actually get into a situation that ends in a tragic result. So it's very important for us to really enhance our system there, our early identification system. Some of the other things that we've worked with the Post Council to add supplemental information to the post-employment status check report for terminations and involuntary resignations. And I think that's important because when we identify someone that quite frankly shouldn't be in law enforcement, we need to keep them out of law enforcement. And by providing that little checkbox, what it does is it now notifies other agencies that there is something that they need to look at before they hire this employee, so that we don't continue to have them going from agency to agency. We've implemented a duty to intervene policy since then, as well as expanded our use of force policy. So those are some of the things that we've done since, quite frankly, starting and really going through the changes here and really just having these conversations with you. As I mentioned before, I hate that we're here for the reasons we're here, but I can tell you I feel good about the changes we're making, and I'm glad that we are making these changes because it is going to help us become the agency and really continue to be the agency that we should be.
And Colonel Davis, my emphasis on, since the committee began its oversight was not to take credit for changes versus when you implemented them, et cetera. It was more to get for the record, and I appreciate that. It was more for the record of what has changed, so that we can know what still, in the event we have recommendations for further changes, so that we could know to address in the report. A couple of outstanding matters. As I recall, when we began the committee oversight, there was an issue of, for instance, Lieutenant Colonel Kane's phone, and I think that was taken for some type of forensic review, if I recall correctly. Can you update us on the status of that matter?
Well, quite frankly, that is still at the Inspector General's level, and I haven't received an update as of late.
So the phone issue and Lieutenant Colonel Kane, that is all still with the Inspector General.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for appearing today.
Yes, ma'am. And I would like to make one other change to what we've done since. When we look at starting to create these changes, one of the things I noticed was it was kind of all over the place. I've since created a professional standards section now that is going to help us organize these changes. It's not just making changes on a whim. We are actually organizing how we're making changes. We're keeping records of what changes we're making, and then we're looking at how they're impacting the agency. And as we do that, then we can go back, and if we need to make changes back or revert back, then we can. But I've created a professional standards section and compliance section so that we can do a better job of categorizing and organizing our changes, and not just making changes just because someone is telling us we need to make changes, but do it in a systematic manner that helps our agency and helps guide our agency.
Thank you, Colonel Davis.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Video. Representative Nelson.
Morning, Colonel. Thank you for being here. I don't need to beat a dead horse. I know my colleagues have kind of gone over most of this stuff. Just as kind of in the same line of questioning as Representative Villio, would it be possible for you to give us some kind of memo that just outlines all these changes that you've made, and maybe if you've had time to see whatever impact that these changes have had so far, since some of them might have been implemented a little while ago, but if you could maybe just give us a written document with all those things in there, it might be easier for our report, and then also might be easier for us moving forward. That's the only thing I was going to ask, and thank you very much.
Yes, sir. We'll provide that.
Thank you, Representative Nelson. Representative Bacala.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I think one of the things you have to do as an agency is go back and look carefully at this incident so you know what to fix. And since you're working toward those changes, I'm assuming that you have done so. You have looked closely at this. Now, let me just throw a few things out that, we have had access recently to the journals that were kept at that time. A couple of points within the journals, okay? 10 days after the incident, there's a note that says, in custody death dash review process ? So all that tells me is on 5/20/19, somebody's talking about what does the process look like, because there's a question mark. Review process ? 2 days later, 5/22/19, the top of the page is titled in custody death, 9:30 a.m. I suppose. Then a note below it, video issue, review past videos, realize there's a problem, must address immediately, with 2 asterisks, issued to comply with policy on camera issued by captain. New note, open IA investigation, then an arrow, suspend pending criminal, administrative leave, video audit of Hollingsworth history. If you go, then that, we after that, there's not much in the notes for many, many months, actually until 9/17 of 2020. Well, no, I take that back. There are some other, that was a different one. But the point is, 12 days after this incident, it is obvious that people think there's a problem because it's discussed here with the notes: administrative leave, video audit of Hollingsworth history. But the most disturbing thing to me is, and it's a question mark, open IA investigation, suspended pending criminal. Now, right then and there, the message that I read from this is, let this guy, or let whoever, now look, maybe some conclusion hadn't been drawn yet about whether the actions were within the law or not, within the policy or not. So I'm putting this in perspective. But the fact that you're leaving open the option that we're going to suspend the internal investigation pending a criminal investigation does one thing. It leaves open the possibility of leaving horrible officers on the streets. So I go back to the fact that the disconnect, and you can fire guys who don't break the law. You can fire guys for committing policy violations. So there's two different standards. But automatically you're holding yourself to the criminal standard if you're not conducting an IA investigation, which could also hold them to the policy standard, which is higher. You go to there are some notes, but really the next significant notes on this case are a year and 4 months later. Significant notes. There are bits and pieces in there. But suddenly, a year and 4 months later, June 2nd, 2020, maybe less than a year and something. But anyway, that's the date. Suddenly, the notes start gaining again. But what's the top of the note that it seems to be driving this set of notes, I'm assuming? The first note on June 2nd, 2020 said FBI conference call with JBE 5 p.m. And suddenly we're talking about this now that the FBI is engaged. I could go through the notes, and then 9/17 is apparently a real meeting takes place where in-depth discussion about this case. Not until 9/17/20. I won't read everything to you, but point is, as you're reviewing, as you're going through the process of identifying what went wrong so you can fix it, actually we might have more information about some of this than you do, and I don't know that we have the ability to share this information in more detail. We can decide if we want to go through this next set of notes. They're long. Instances where body cam was turned off. One of those instances alleges he slapped somebody while in a driver course. Traffic stops, trooper assist, not policing, in-car cameras, unlawful orders, yada yada. It goes on and on. But the point is, nothing was done. I mean, we can go through all the reasons and the policy problems and this, that, and the other, but the bottom line is people knew it was wrong, or things looked very suspicious. I go back to the trooper who first reviewed the camera footage, the use of force expert, but nobody did anything, which to me is the most egregious part of all this. Is nobody did anything. We don't know the motives for why. We don't know if it's bad policy. We don't know if it's intentionally trying to cover up. We don't know if it's just deliberate indifference. All we do know is nobody did anything. And even today, I don't know what remains open except the criminal investigation. 3.5 years later. I guess it's 3.5 years later. Any comment? I mean, you gotta look back. So let me ask you this, simplistic term. Let's don't talk about CAD and this, that, and the other. In a quick word, what went wrong, and how do you fix it?
Leadership, and accountability. And how do you fix it is you take ownership of it. We touch it, we own it. And me as the agency head, whenever I put directives in place, whenever I put policies in place, then I enforce them, and I enforce them consistently as I can. And from there, that's how we fix it.
I just want somebody to recognize that time is important.
Yes, sir.
And especially when you have a situation where you might have someone on the street in your uniform, wearing your badge, holding your commission, who maybe shouldn't be doing so. How long does it take to say, I'm sorry, you can't work here anymore?
Sir.
How long? How many days do we let them police when they shouldn't be in a badge? Now, there really is a question. I'm just saying, what is acceptable now?
And
I mean, to me, 2 days is not acceptable. Is about the limit of what I would say is acceptable. Get in, look at the video. We're gonna make a call right now. What happens? I know you guys have, when your policies start getting in the way, then they're in the way. I know there are protections and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just asking the question, and I really mean it. How long should we expect an investigation, an IA investigation, to take before action should be expected? I think there ought to be a standard.
Well, and I think that standard has been created by the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. And as far as making that decision, then we make that decision based upon all available information and evidence and facts. And I don't think that it's prudent for us as an agency head to make that decision at the time that I watch a video, because while the video provides a lot of information, it may not provide you all of the relevant facts. So I think it's important for us to conduct a investigation to ensure that we get all of the available facts and information. And once we do so, then we make that decision, and we let, whether it be the appeal process, the court process, take its place.
Yeah, and I'm talking about 2 days. You're on desk duty till we figure this out. Are y'all doing that? I mean, if there's an allegation of something and it's credible, I know there are a lot of incredible, but if it is credible, how long does it take before you say, turn in your keys, you're on desk duty?
Well, for me, if there's an allegation that makes me believe as an agency head that you're in danger to the public, I'm not putting you on desk duty. I'm putting you on administrative leave. I do not want you on any duty.
And I think, some of the things that we talked about this in the prior meeting, IA investigations that hang over people's heads for months and months and years are not fair to the public, and it's not fair to the troopers either. I think everybody deserves a quick resolution, as quick as it can be within the Bill of Rights and such. But that's, even the troopers don't like that you can be under investigation for months and months and months when. Anyway, thank you, Colonel.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. Let me just follow up on what you're saying. And Colonel, I'm so happy that you said leadership, because the same person you read in the journal notes who's saying suspending the IA investigation pending the criminal investigation is the same person who said that the actions were awful but lawful. So I think we need to make sure that we keep this in its full context and figure out, so whether it was unintentional or intentional that we kept a bad officer on the street, we can all draw our own conclusions. But when you've got that attitude, I would tend to lean on the side that it was intentional. Representative Villio.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Colonel Davis, without I've tried to avoid stepping into the lane of prosecutors. But with regard to the video and internal affairs investigation, quite frankly, there are actions in that video that any prosecutor would tell you is unlawful. Period. End of story. The first time you see it doesn't take a law enforcement perspective, doesn't take a defense perspective, doesn't take a prosecutor's perspective. I think if you got all three in the room every single discipline would agree that there are actions observed in that video that were unlawful. And so it greatly concerns me that based upon the way things were set up, that trooper and or others were allowed to continue to be on duty when listen, I am all for supporting officers and making sure you have all of the facts in place before you mete out discipline. But when it is glaringly obvious that there is excessive use of force used, that there is no one who can defend it, that individual should not have remained in the employ and out in the public serving without having had some type of discipline. So I think there has to be some consideration of that with regard to investigations going forward. And you're right. It's about taking them off duty. It's perhaps suspending them from the employ while the investigation is occurring. But you cannot leave an individual in the force and not address that for more than a year and expect to have the confidence from the public in the state police. And that's something that has to be addressed without a doubt going forward. And there are many, Colonel, and I know this isn't going to come as a surprise to you, there are many that are going to say that a lot of this came about when you were in high command. And I have no doubt that there are a lot of individuals who are questioning whether or not you are the one to be able to effectively implement these changes. And I hope, time will prove those individuals wrong. You are in the leadership. I take you at your word. And I certainly expect that there will be the changes that there are and will continue to be the changes needed to restore the confidence in the state police, because the hard working men and women of that department, of which there are many, certainly far more than the bad apples, deserve that. The public deserves that. The safety of the law enforcement officers depends upon that, and the safety of the public depends upon that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Villio. I think the board is clear. I just have a couple of questions for you, Colonel.
Sir.
Has anyone, whether it be DA Belton or the AG's office, requested any of the information from your investigations as it relates to Ronald Greene?
Yes, sir. We've turned over all of our information to the federal authorities, and from there, they decided what information they have dispersed to whom from there.
All right, because look, I know there's certainly the criminal aspect of this. There's the legislative aspect that we're dealing with, but I think if we're going to give Ms. Horton full closure, there's also the civil aspect, and I just hadn't heard anything from that. So I'm just wondering, and I'm assuming that lies with the Attorney General's office. Have they requested anything from you?
Not recently, no, sir.
Okay, but they have in the past.
Yes, sir.
All right,
They have.
all right. Again, the board is clear. I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, hold on.
Do you have any closing comments? I know this is enough rough hearing for you. I think you ought to have the opportunity, if you would, and even after the next witness, if you choose to.
Well, and thank you, sir. Again, I know some people say it's rough for me, but I think back to Ms. Horton and her family, and if it takes me sitting up here, it takes you to get the answers you need to get for us to get to where we need to be, then so be it. And I'm open to that. Ms. Horton, and again, to their family, I am deeply sorry. I can't think of how rough this is for them day in and day out. And that's what's at the forefront of my heart and of my mind. So, me going through this, if it's gonna make any part of their day better, I'll go through it.
All right, thank you, Colonel. And per Representative Bacala's request and my request, why don't you hang around, and if we need to follow up on any comments with you after Ms. Horton speaks, we'll give you that opportunity.
Yes, sir.
All right. Our next witness is Ms. Mona Horton. Thank you, Ms. Harden, for appearing. Look, I know it's always an effort for you to get here, putting it mildly, but we always appreciate when you come. And so I want to give you an opportunity to have any opening comments before you entertain any questions.
Thank you. First and foremost, I just want to thank everyone, this panel here. What I will say is, what happened May 10th, 2019 is clear for all to see. What should have been done has been absolutely nothing. I agree, and I thank you all for saying what you said. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. To say that for Superintendent Lamar Davis to say that he wants to move forward, but yet we still have Corey York, we still have Clary, those who were there when my son was murdered, to still be on the force, to be looked at like you're still an officer of integrity. I just don't understand how you can say this is an awesome organization, Louisiana State Troopers. What's happened with Ronnie is just a drop in the bucket. We all need to just be honest about what's going on here. And the fact that it needs to be from the top down. You cannot have internal investigations done by those from within. You cannot investigate your own when those who are doing the investigating also have their hands stained. This is so obvious. I was totally ignorant coming into this until it affected me. I'm not dumb, I'm not ignorant. I'm a mother who saw her son being beaten purposely, tortured. I don't even understand how you can look your troopers in the face. They continue to have a badge, they continue to have a paycheck, they continue to be allowed to walk through as honorable. I just don't understand. You purposely turned a blind eye on what happened. That's it. I don't have the pretty words. I don't have anything other than what happened to Ronnie was murder. What should have happened has been not a damn thing, nothing. 3.5 years later, it's been a long dragged out, the fact that you have the whistleblowers, you have people who came forward to say what they saw. You have good men and women of integrity wearing those badges, coming forward and speaking of what they know, what they saw, and continue to know. They shouldn't have to speak in fear. They should be able to step forward with ease, say what they see, what they know, in order to move forward, in order for the safety of the police, for what you said, Representative Villio, the safety of the American public, citizens. You have to do it. There's no other way but to do it the right way. You cannot sugarcoat. You cannot continue to go through state troopers with nepotism, favoritism, because that's clearly what's happened here. The fact that from the top down, the retirement of Reeves in the midst of this, the retirement of all the other officers, promotions, Noel, all of them. The fact that Clary didn't even have a slap on the wrist. He condoned what he saw. This is where we're at. This is it. How it unfolds and who ends up answering for what happened to Ronnie, I'm sick to my stomach just thinking that I'm just still hoping that someone will pay for the murder of my boy. My family showed a picture of him. My immediate reaction was, why didn't that boy call me yet? I'm still in denial that my Ronnie was mercilessly killed, murdered. I sent my kids back a text, just that. I felt like picking up the phone. Let me call this boy. He hasn't called me. It's denial because of what's happened since May 10, 2019. I've been in the trance. I've said that the last time I was here. That's the only way I'm able to function. And that's good. Because other than that, I'd have completely been hollowed out. All I ask is for what's happening. It's just like they say, if it could have been done right the first time. Everyone was literally petrified to take the necessary precautions to fire these badass cops. They should have taken the necessary precautions to deal with it right then and there. But the fact that no one wants to hold anyone accountable, it says the significance of how deep this organized crime is. The fact that you got the DOJ over here, they need to really look in, and there's no way you can, the words that Lamar Davis, how can you say you're doing all the right thing when Clary is still here, York is still here? How can you say moving forward when you're still not being an effective superintendent? What's done in the past, it should not be overlooked and saying, well, I wasn't here then. I can't address that. We're talking about the troopers murdering a man while he was still behind the wheel of a car, tasing with intention to kill. He wasn't going to walk away. I saw that when I first saw that video. I don't care if it's 30 years from now. You still go back to that first day. You still go back to that first week. You still go back to that year. What happened in the state of Louisiana and what caused what's the cover-up that happened. I don't care how many years you go past this. You go back to day one, to where we are, to when you decide to wrap it up. You're still going to come up with the same conclusion. And if you do not, then nepotism continues. The cover-up continues. Politics in the murder of Ronald Greene continues. I hate like hell that there's backdoor deals being done. I hate it. It is what it is. I hate it. If the state of Louisiana, if you care about what's going on in your community, you'd go in. You'd make really credible boys clubs. You'd go in and you'd, with a fine-tooth comb, let those kids know there's people out here that care about you. You're going to have your future. You know, you don't have to duck and dodge every time you see a police car. I have grandchildren that react that way. The youngest is 7. When he first started being afraid, he wasn't quite 6. And that's a scary reality of how my family lives, how a lot of family lives. I've been in connection with so many families who's lost loved ones behind police brutality. If there's changes that's being done, why does it continue? Why does it continue? Why hasn't it stopped? Why hasn't it stopped? And why are your bad apples still employed?
All right. Representative Villio.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Ms. Mona, thank you for being here today. One of the points that I found interesting, and I didn't intend to say it today, but it struck me when you're talking about the lack of discipline meted out to certain officers. It's funny how I have been chastised in a written letter by counsel for the governor for statements I've made in this committee. I've probably gotten more than those officers have gotten in that regard, and it just struck me as odd. But with that said, and referencing that letter, you made the statement when I first saw the video. And that's of particular interest to me today, because we know from the from that letter to me, and we also know from some press conferences and news articles that it has been stated that you and or the Ronald Greene family, and I assume that means you, saw the Clary video back in October 2020, some 6 months before it was found by an audit team and then given to the DA and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we've even had, I guess it's a reality personality, if you will, saying that she was in the room and saw that video back in October of 2020. Can you state for the record whether or not you and the family were shown the Clary video at that time?
Definitely. We were not. The narrative was in total control at the time. When we did see that video, and my question is, if you doubt what I say, why is there not, there were others there, should there not been a video, shouldn't have been recorded for sound or whatever during that time, in order to have total clarity of who saw what and when?
I don't doubt you, Miss Mona.
No, I'm saying,
Okay.
To keep from going back and forth,
Sure.
Should there not have been a video in there for the fact that this is a government building, in order so that we can just get all this talk? But no, we did not see it.
Can you help me with the location of where, when you were shown any videos, you were
Only one time.
one time, and where were you when that occurred?
I was told it was the
EOC, Emergency Operations Center.
I really don't know.
Okay.
I was told that it was the state troopers compound.
Okay.
I'm really not sure. I'm not sure.
Do you remember who was present when the video? Who was?
Edwards. It was Edwards. It was Belton. It was a legal team. It was the lawyer of Edwards. Those that were in control of the video was in the table in the front. We were in the back. There was just a row of chairs.
So the governor was present.
Yes.
And
Introduced himself. Belton went into a whole spiel of what he's done and all his accolades. Yes, I remember that vividly.
were you aware that there was a showing of a video of videos before the family got to see them on that it would seem to be that same day? Were you aware of that?
We were told that they were viewing, and we were coming there specifically to see the video.
Do you know who maybe had represented you, if there was anyone representing you or the family that was in the what one would refer to as the initial showing of a video or videos? Do you know who would have been there?
The initial showing before us,
Yes, ma'am.
I really can't. I
Okay,
don't know.
because as I read the notes in Colonel Reeves' journal, which happens to be, interestingly, coincidentally, don't know, actually the last notes he wrote in his journal in his career as colonel was that day. And it talks about the video, it talks about the videos being shown to the Greene family, but it specifically talks about the videos the family did not view initial showing only attorneys. So were you aware that there were some attorneys that saw some videos before you got to view them?
Well, I'm sure.
Okay.
Because me and my daughter was on the outside. We were put in a lounge, a lounge, a snack, where snacks were. And they were viewing it. We were there for well over an hour. And we were told by the legal team, if you don't want to see it, you don't have to. And so we were on the outside. I could hear my son screaming. I could hear all that stuff. So we weren't that far separated from the actual viewing. If you mean that would be...
Well, I don't know, but for those in the audience, for those watching, for the governor's staff, for anybody who's watching this hearing today, when Phaedra Parks says that she took notes and therefore you, Miss Mona, saw that Clary video on October 14th, 2020, there's an easy explanation to that, in my opinion, and it's what you said. You did not see it. And Colonel Reeves' notes back up that there were at least 2 showings on that day.
Yes. Phaedra Parks was there. We attended a lunch that was in her honor that day. That was my first time meeting her. I was totally confused as why we were even in that event. But anyway, she ended up there. And so she might have saw it at that time, but we did not see it. We were cut. That video, when we saw it, was cut at the very beginning. We were told, you don't want to see this. This is a chase. And my daughter said, we want to see the whole thing. So it was bits and pieces shown to us to where you can't say we saw the Clary. And they stopped it at their own will. We were not given the opportunity from beginning to end. No.
Rest assured, Miss Mona, as Ronald Greene's mother, I have no doubt that if you had seen that Clary video on October 14th, 2020, you would know you saw that video. Thank you so much for your clarification, and thank you for being here. And again, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Video. Representative Hughes. Hold on, Rep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Mona, first of all, thank you again for being here. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for your strength. I will reiterate what I said earlier. And you said it, and I said it, and I'm going to say it again. Accountability is a word that's often tossed around. But when you have individuals that are still employed, that shouldn't be. I've seen people fired in organizations for making comments on social media. But yet we have individuals that are still employed within the agency. And so there's a reason that the public continues, when they hear the word accountability, they continue to have skepticism. Because there, in my opinion, I'm speaking for myself, has not been true accountability and total accountability. It is my prayer that there will be accountability and that you can achieve some sense of closure. And certainly, I'm committed to that, and I know many of my colleagues are as well. But just wanted to thank you for your testimony as always. And just know there are many of us that will continue to journey with you and will continue to publicly fight to ensure that justice is served. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Can I say
Representative
something?
Hughes. Yes, you can certainly comment. Yes.
Thank you for that. I have family members that say, Ma, they say Edwards is not going to show. Why are you going to go? I said, this is for Ronnie. I have to. The fact that I make that drive is no problem. No problem. We come from an Army family, no problem. You do what you have to do and you keep pushing. I would not feel my son. I know what happened to him. He should have been able to live. They shouldn't have beat him to where they killed him. They murdered him. But the fact that it's heavy, coming to Louisiana is always so damn heavy. The anxiety, I can't sleep, the pain in my chest. But then I come here and I see y'all here, and I'm good. Because I know I'm with people that care, they're people that give a damn. Because what you saw shouldn't have been. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative Hughes. I think the board is clear, Ms. Mona, but let me just, again, follow up on what Representative Hughes has said. We certainly applaud you for your courage and your strength in coming here. And I will tell you something that I've told you privately before. Speaking for myself, but I think I speak for everybody. Part of the concern, I know the concern was that this was going to be some type of dog and pony show and nothing was going to come out of that. And when we talked, I told you that certainly that if that was going to be the case, that I wouldn't serve here. And I can tell you, I think you see from everybody here, if that was going to be the case, nobody else would be here either. We're going to do everything in our ability, I assure you, to make sure that there is closure for you as it relates to this portion of the process. Of course, we don't control the criminal process. We don't control the civil process. But from an accountability process of state police and to that point, and the findings we've had so far and the ones that we're going to continue to develop, we're going to do everything that's possible to make sure that there's some resolution to this. Again, we wouldn't be serving on this committee if we didn't think otherwise. And I can certainly tell you that is not only Representative Hughes' commitment, Representative Bacala, Representative Villio Nelson, Marcel and Landry as well, who couldn't be here today, and Representative McGee, for that matter, the chair. I'm just thinking about what Representative Villio said, and it doesn't take a lawyer, it doesn't take a genius to look at that video one time, and again to see what happened should have never happened. And that is something that state police is going to have to live with in its legacy. And it's going to be a legacy of the state of Louisiana as well. And while we can't correct it in the sense of bringing Ronnie back, we do have to own that, and we do have to make it right. And in my opinion, we're nowhere near making it right. And so we have a ways to go, but as Representative Hughes said, we're going to be here with you on that journey, and we'll be there until it's made right.
Thank you. I will say, as we come, y'all's beginning statement is as you come to an ending where you fold, at some point everything has to come to an end. But to the point where those that were over Troop F, those that were part of how they received evidence, how they knocked down evidence, for all those that were allowed to retire, all those who were allowed to just fade into the sunset and or be employed here, there, wherever, lucratively, I might say. Yes. What's been laid in front of me, and a lot of it is just there in the news. Louisiana has a lot to clean up. It's really shameful. It's really shameful how you allowed, and when I say you allowed, Edwards can't say he didn't know this. Reeves can say that that's not my job. I left it to the sergeants. I left it to this and that. The level of nepotism, and I understand everybody breaks bread together. You have barbecues, you go to golfing events, all this and that, and you just can't bring yourself to hold these bad, good old boys accountable and the top brass for what's been done. For Lamar Davis to say he's doing all he can, it's like he's still in muddy waters. Clary should not be there. York should not be on payroll. Nobody should. This is murder. This is murder, and it's condoned. I don't care how many times you don't make yourself available to these meetings. It doesn't wash your hands clean of what you know and what you've done. And I say that to all of those from the top down. Why does anyone have to be subpoenaed to get the truth? And then when you're here, you can just lie. You can just continuously lie and expect the panel to just take it. It's really shameful behavior. It's made a mockery of everyone's time. Payroll, what's happened here? A total mockery. It's really in bad taste, and it's really, really foul. 2022 going into 2023. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. And I don't care how many times those May 10th washed their hands of blood, they did not. It's still there.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Moan. I'm going to give the Colonel an opportunity to address. All right. He doesn't. All right. So he's declining. All right. So look, with that being said, we don't have any announcements at this time. I will get with Chairman McGee to figure out and coordinate with the governor's office to see when we'll have him scheduled. And as soon as we get that date, I'll be sure to let you know. And
thank you.
And we'll move forward from that. All right. If there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Representative Video has made a motion to adjourn. No opposition. We are adjourned. Thank you.